everybody! It's so good to see all of your digital, non-existent faces in the chat. Welcome into this live, wherever you're watching this from, whether it's Twitch or TikTok or YouTube Live. Hello, come on in, grab a seat. We're gonna be talking for a little bit. If you don't know who I am, my name is Connie Chang. My pronouns are they, he, and she. I am the game master and creative producer for Transplanar RPG, which is an all-transgender, people of color-led dark fantasy TTRPG channel telling poetic stories set in an original, non-colonial, anti-Orientalist multiverse. This is our first ever live stream of Professor Chang's pop-up shop, where I talk tabletop slop till I want to stop. I'm still workshopping the tagline, so if you have something else that's a little kitschy, a little rhymey, that gets the point of the pop-up shop across, pitch your ideas in chat. This is our first time multi-streaming, so if audio craps out or weird things happen in video where you suddenly can't hear us or my face starts glitching all over the place, just let us know, put it in chat, and my lovely producer, who is unseen but is running everything, will be troubleshooting things in the background as things go. So please bear with us. We are working out the kinks of all of our tech issues, but this is going to be a really good, really fun time regardless. I'm so excited to see all of you in the chat here. So before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. Arc 2 of the Chaos Protocol, which is what this stream is world building about, will debut next Saturday at 8 p.m. US Eastern Time. That's January 6th, 8 p.m. wherever you like to watch our live streams, whether that's Twitch for the full horizontal experience, or TikTok if you just like to watch things short form on your phone, or even YouTube Live if that is your channel of choice. But yeah, that's basically what's going to happen with Arc 2 of the Chaos Protocol. And in the meantime, I could be world building live on stream. But first, delving into an overview of things we already know about Arc 2, talking about the major touchstones, motifs, and themes, as well as doing a deeper delve into each of these things. So feel free to ask your questions in chat. I'm mostly going to be looking over at the Twitch chat, but I also do have TikTok open on my phone right here. So if you ask a question in TikTok, I'm going to do my best to grab it and address it. Feel free to just keep questions rolling on a rolling basis. If I miss anyone's questions, I'm going to ask my producer to grab it and ping me in our Discord channel. So if I'm a little belated in answering your question, that's why. It's because we have 10 different tabs open. So please bear with us and exercise some patience, because I'm so excited for this, and I'm so excited to delve into Arc 2. I think this kind of goes without saying, but there are spoilers for all of Arc 1, specifically the ending of Arc 1 in this world building stream. So if you are new to the Chaos Protocol and you care about spoilers, no hurt feelings if you want to tap out at this point or come back here and revisit it. But yeah, there are Arc 1 finale spoilers for this stream. But not too many spoilers for Arc 2. We're just going to be talking about the world and some of the people in it and whatnot. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's begin the actual thing that we're doing here. First with an overview of Arc 2. As you can see on my screen on Twitch and YouTube, it's also on TikTok. Excellent. My producer is awesome. You can see a little Google Doc I've put together here. This is basically a screenshot of the Session 0 sheet that I'm going to be sharing with my cast tomorrow. We have a Session 0 tomorrow, and I'm working on it tonight, literally the night before. Classic GM vibes. Not doing any work on this until literally the 11th hour. But first, what I always like to tell my cast is kind of how are we going to open the next leg of our journey, right? A lot has happened at the end of Arc 1. How are we going to get back into the campaign? It's been a couple weeks. We took quite a few days off, got some distance, a nice mini hiatus, coming back eyes fresh, right? So we're going to open Arc 2 Episode 1 2 months after. Again, spoiler warning, so dip out now. This is your last chance to evacuate. 2 months after Sing's death. So Strike Team Nova, who is our main character, it's our adventuring party, they've kind of been on leave since one of their own died really tragically at the end of Arc 1, but they're now preparing for their next May Day mission from Fate. Again, Strike Team Nova is part of the Transplanar Reification and Nourishment Syndicate, which is a secret interplanar agency that answers distress calls across the multiverse and is run by Fate herself. She's not even a god, she's above a god. She's a law of the universe. She's what's known as a precept in my world, in my setting, in my multiverse. So we're going to spend actually several streams at the Syndicate, kind of lingering on flashbacks on what each PC has been doing special scenes with our core NPC for Chaos, Artemis, played by my producer, C. Thomas, whose invisible hand is felt in the stream, but they're currently not seen. Oblivion's influence is basically taking the blame for the death of the Chosen One, right? And Sing is being lauded as this fallen hero. So there's going to be some interesting tension, some interesting role play, some really interesting, I think, character studies toward the beginning of Arc 2. Because, and I've said this before previously, I'll say it again, I'm going to keep saying it till I die. I love doing character-driven stories, right? At the end of the day, that's what I live for. I love character-driven stories. So what the characters feel influence the plot and vice versa. So here, the character's feelings over the immediate death of Sing is going to kind of like influence their mindset and influence the reasons behind what they do in Arc 2. Speaking of which, the core theme for Arc 2 is going to be denial. So broadly, Arc 2 is going to encompass the PC's struggle with denial, right? Over Sing's death. And it's going to play out in very different ways because each of the players that we have embody extremely different characters. So by the end of this arc, our hope, I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but our hope is that the PCs will take a step out of denial, but that step doesn't have to be in a positive direction. You know what I mean? As long as there's some kind of change, I feel like there's a nice like narrative payoff. Because to me, something that signals an unfruitful narrative is when there's like no actual genuine change in any way. And again, change doesn't have to be positive. They can take a step out of denial into like lashing out at people and being like a total jerk. I'm trying to censor myself a little bit more on TikTok so I don't get flagged. But for instance, it could be a step into rage. It could be a step into depression, right? It could be a step into negative coping methods. We've all been there. And I'm going to make it clear to my players, I've said this before, but I'm going to reiterate it during tomorrow's session 0, that they don't have to know what that step looks like. We don't have to predetermine that. We can play as we can find out as we play, right? We can figure it out together spontaneously. That's one of the joys of TTRPGs. We're not going to predetermine it, but this ensures that we're all on the same page about what the core theme is, and it gives them a way, especially as performers for an AP, to know like, okay, like high level broad strokes, I know my character is going to be grappling with this, and as long as they like change from point A to point B in some way from the beginning of this arc to the end of it, like we're cool. You know what I mean? But we're not going to predetermine what that is. We're still opening a lot of things up for improvisation. So denial is also going to be a core theme for this arc's NPC, which is something I'm really excited to play with for Chaos generally, but specifically for Arc 2. Each arc, obviously, if you're familiar with Chaos, you know that each arc of the Chaos Protocol uses a different tabletop role-playing game system and is set in a different plane, right? Because we're part of an interplanar agency. We're hopping from realm to realm. Arc 1, our previous arc, which is essentially our prologue arc, used the Wild CRPG, officially sponsored by MythWorks, and was set in kind of this like leafy sea, basically, an ocean made of leaves. Here, and we're going to get into this in a second, we're using City of Mist, also officially sponsored, as well as a little bit of Wandering Blades by Daniel Kwan, which I'll get into in a second. And every arc will also feature like a core NPC or several core NPCs. So for Arc 1, those are the 3 Scions, right? Sukyon, Abasi, and Amerjin. And here, it will be a spoiler if I do reveal who the core NPC is, so I'm not going to do that. But if you have pledged our Patreon, then you will have seen their art already. You will have seen a little bit of their art, I think. Unless that's wrong, C, please let me know if that's wrong and our patrons haven't seen that yet. I don't want to say anything that's incorrect. But moving on to the system for Arc 2, it's going to be City of Mist. I'm really excited about that. Again, officially sponsored by Son of Oak Games. If you don't know what City of Mist is, it's basically like a system where you get to play mythological figures, but in like a modern fantasy setting. So if you've ever wanted to embody like King Arthur or Red Riding Hood or even Excalibur, like the literal sword itself, you can. And you can play out that mythos, the mythos of that figure as a regular person in the city, also grappling with being just a person, right? So like your take on King Arthur could be like the owner of someone working behind a gas station clerk, right? King Arthur, but there's something about you that makes them King Arthur as well. Like you're living out this myth. And it's typically, like I said, in an urban fantasy setting where like these different mythological figures clash and they're basically playing out their mythological stories in a kind of like fateful, destined way over and over, clashing with each other, and also clashing internally. But here, the city that we're going to be going into isn't going to be urban Western fantasy, right? It's what I'm calling the City of Heaven. So the prototypical Mist in City of Mist is going to come out as dreams. So in City of Mist, why it's called City of Mist is because there's this force known as the Mist, which is the place where mythos come from. So that's where your like King Arthur power comes from, right? It's basically like the essence of magic. Like in D&D 5e, the Forgotten Realms, the Weave is the essence of magic, right? So you can venture into the Mist and learn more about it, but it's also extremely dangerous and very, very, very volatile, which I always love. I love when my players do extremely dangerous things and interact with volatile forces of the universe. That's what I'm all about. So basically, in the City of Heaven, my take on the Mist is that it basically represents the dream realm, right? Heaven, and we're going to get into this more in a second, is populated by immortal beings in my setting. So the closest they can get to death, because they're immortal, right? How are you going to what are they going to do after they die, right? The closest they get to death is when they dream, is when they enter the world of the subconscious, right? So again, more on that later. But this is specifically also drawing on my own personal experiences with like dreams, prophecy a little bit. I know that makes me sound like I'm a prophet. I'm going somewhere with that later, I promise. But also dreams are really important, I think, in Chinese culture, in traditional Chinese culture, and a lot of like Chinese folk tradition, which I'm also going to hit on in a second when we talk about historical fantasy via ciencia. So let's discuss the actual genres, right, of Arc 2, the actual thing that we're going to be interacting with and playing with. So it's historical fantasy, right? It's ciencia, which I'm going to define in a second, but I'm specifically doing a non-Eurocentric approach to historical fantasy, drawing on Chinese touchstones, specifically diasporic Chinese touchstones. A little context for myself, I'm Chinese American. I'm 1.5 generation. I was born in the States, but I grew up in China from when I was like 2 to like 9 or 10. So I grew up like my native tongue is Mandarin, though I've gotten a little bit weak flexing that language muscle, right? And I grew up surrounded by my own culture, very insulated, saturated with it before like middle of elementary school, basically, like going back to the States. But I have like very strong roots with a lot of my family in China. And I also have been thinking a lot as an artist, as an academic, as a scholar, and also just as a person about what it means to be a trans and queer diasporic Chinese person making art. And a lot of that thinking influences my approach to world building and influences my approach to being a GM even. So let's talk about some of those influences, right? Ciencia, it's a genre of Chinese fantasy that literally translates to immortal heroes. You might have heard of wuxia, which translates to like martial heroes. Ciencia is like the high fantasy version of wuxia, is kind of like low fantasy, right? Martial fantasy. Nowadays, it wasn't always like this, but nowadays, Ciencia tends to be driven by cultivators. Which are basically martial artists who cultivate their souls in order to attain power, usually in the form of immortality of some kind. That's why it's called immortal heroes, Xian, and or godhood. So as a result, the genre is sometimes referred to as cultivator fantasy or cultivation fantasy. So another shared core concept across multiple cultivation fantasy stories is ascension. So that's basically when characters achieve apotheosis through attaining the pinnacle of cultivation, right? They become gods, right? They become immortal godlike beings that drive the story, that guide the main characters, that serve as obstacles in their path even. So the main characters might even have achieved apotheosis, right? Like in the case of Heaven Official's Blessing, which is one of the most well-known Ciencia stories, or the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, which is by the same author. And cultivation stories tend to feature magical items, divine beasts, demons, ghosts, and Taoist principles kind of coupled with Chinese folk religion, like alchemy, internal and external alchemy, qigong, yin-yang, that sort of thing. So what this means when we marry it with City of Mist is I'm going to be cienifying City of Mist. So here, rifts, which are basically what City of Mist calls adventurers. You know, D&D calls the PCs adventurers, right? City of Mist calls the PCs rifts because they represent people bridging mythos and being like just regular Joes, right? Rifts are cultivators. The city that it's set in, like I mentioned earlier, is the City of Heaven. And City of Mist is also like a noir mystery game. So the moody mysteries that the PCs are going to be disentangling are going to be played out via scheming factions and dark conspiracy. So there's going to be a lot of thriller, and political intrigue, which I'm going to get to in a second. So I've also written out here player considerations, because in session zeros, I always like to set expectations for myself and for my players. And this is never like a hard and fast thing, right? It's always a conversation, but this is the starting point of the conversation and what I would like as a GM. So this is an ongoing conversation I've been having with my cast, especially as we draw on specifically Chinese cultural touchstones for Arc 2. It's important to me that players avoid Orientalist or xenophobic language and approaches to interacting with this new world. Xenophobic basically means discrimination specifically against Chinese people, or like racism against Chinese people specifically. So definitely encouraging my players to still play with like the fun of being in a brand new place, right? Because part of the fun, part of the hook of the Chaos Protocol is that these PCs go from plane to plane that are all super different, and they learn new things, right? And they see new places. So we kind of still do want there to be a sense of like wide-eyed wonder and curiosity, right? But we don't want that curiosity to be rooted in disgust, exoticism, or this idea that like the places they're going to are backwards or less than for some reason, right? Or like super advanced to the point of like fetishization. You know what I mean? So my advice to my players would be, if they're like kind of struggling to interact with an aspect of the world because it's so different or new to them, which isn't a bad thing, you know, I would encourage them to embrace curiosity about it and ask questions instead of like defaulting to, I think, you know, a prototypical white supremacist response of being like, oh, I'm just going to be super judgmental about something I don't understand and make sweeping statements and sweeping assumptions about how things work or should work based on my own limited understanding of the world, right? So basically just be open-minded and don't be a jerk. Don't be a PG jerk. So my other consideration for my players would be to like try to shrug off their assumptions about how things should be. And this isn't just for Arc 2, but just generally speaking as well, especially as someone invested in building non-colonial anti-Orientalist worlds. This is kind of like step one. It's decentering your own perspective. It's accepting that what you think is default is not actually default, right? The idea that there's two genders, that's super white supremacist, very colonialist, decenter yourself, right? The idea that race is inherent, or, you know, that bioessentialism has any basis in reality. Neither of these things are true, right? But that's a little 301. I'll make it more 101 here. Basically, this just means whether approaching family dynamics in Arc 2 from people within that realm, or governmental structures, or political structures, cultural practices, food, dance, language, basically anything you can imagine that makes up a culture or society, approach it with an open mind, with curiosity, right? Without assumptions, judgment, or condescension, right? And as a kind of at the table way of reifying this, it's canon that trans agents, if you're a member of the syndicate, are basically trained to limit their impact on another plane, basically make their footprint as small as possible, outside of the directive of their mission, right? And this includes imposing their own opinions and attitudes on the peoples and places they interact with, right? So you're going there not as a savior, even though they're answering distress calls, and not as like a voyeur or a tourist, but as someone who's going because people have actively asked you to come, and you're going to help those people on their terms. You know what I mean? Not because you think you know what's better than them, right? So we're trying to we're not being like white saviors or colonizers or imperialists in going from plane to plane. We're specifically going there like in a humble way and in a way that decenters ourselves, which is also why the NPCs, I'm going to get to this in a second, and we're going to get to build some together. The NPCs of each plane are so crucial, and they're just as important and just as fleshed out and just as complicated and given just as much as an opportunity for richly realized humanity as the PCs are, right? What I'm never going to do is just throw like a nameless horde at my players and be like, you get to kill these things, these people, right? These things, and not feel guilt over it, right? I'm never going to do that. That's not the kind of storytelling I'm interested in cultivating at my tables, right? I'm interested in like actually grappling with gray morality, and that means humanizing everyone, everyone at the table, right? That also means divesting from racist ways of world building. So that aside, moving on to the next genre touchstone. This is something I'm very excited about: mystery thriller with a dash of horror. So we're going to be playing in the realm of the eerie in Arc 2, right? The disquiet, the unnerving, the feeling that something's just a little bit off on the edges of your perception, right? And all that dread, all that intrigue, all those clues that you're going to like peel back like the layers of an onion are going to ramp up until this house of cards, precarious house of cards, collapses and the heart pounding truth is finally revealed. So I'm gonna be leaning away from a full-blown gore fest for Arc 2. Like it's not gonna be like slasher horror or anything like that, but there will be some horror elements in the realm of monsters, body horror, the occult, specifically drawing on Chinese cultural touchstones. So Chinese take on ghosts and demons and possession and death and nightmares, which I'll get into more about what that means, right? Specifically divesting from European ways of viewing and imagining horror. And I'm going to define what that means for me in a second. So player considerations under this genre touchpoint are, as part of the mystery thriller, they're not going to know everything immediately, right? This is a slow burn, my babes. This is a slow burn thriller. So they're going to get a few glimpses of a greater horror, right? Early on, sure. Yes, I'll give it to them, throw some scraps, right? But its true form, it's not going to be fully realized until much deeper into the arc, until we approach the finale, honestly. And this is just like for storytelling too. Like you don't want to just like put the finale in the very beginning, right? You want it to like parcel it out, drop breadcrumbs down. That's what makes a mystery good, right? You unravel it, it spirals in on itself, and you peel back the layers, right? Until that final twist. The horror also is not going to like manifest itself immediately. So I'm encouraging my players to basically have fun. Have fun with it. Have fun with not knowing. That's fun, right? Have fun with playing with your character's feelings of unease, of being unnerved, right? Of even maybe second guessing themselves. Like, was that just a shadow, or was that like what was that? You know, like that's fun to play with, right? And that's fun to embody and to perform. Like basically the protagonists of a horror movie, they don't know they're in a horror movie, right? So there's like some fun dramatic irony that can happen where the players know that there's going to be some horror at the table, but the characters don't know it yet. And that's deliciously fun to chew on for the audience as well, because now you all know there's going to be some horror. And if the characters don't know, you're like biting your fingers being like, when are they going to figure out that they're in a horror movie, right? Until, of course, the clues about the genre are a little too much for the characters to deny. Speaking of which, maybe this could even interface with our theme of denial in some way. Just going to drop that in. Another player consideration under mystery thriller is balancing agency with horror. So as a GM who really likes horror, I really like dark fantasy. I'm really into body horror. Give me monsters, give me messed up people doing messed up things, right? And part of what I think can make horror so potent as a genre, in tabletop especially, is a loss of agency. And I say this as a completely neutral thing, neither positive or negative. It just kind of is, right? It's this idea that a nightmarish, eldritch, chthonic force is so great that you can't just destroy it by being yourself. Like it's bigger than you. That's part of the horror, right? You'd be lucky to just survive. You know what I mean? And that's what makes a lot of horror movies, even horror video games, so potent, right? You're just trying to survive. You're not trying to even beat the evil, right? But as a GM, how this will translate for me is I do plan on messing with the mechanics of City of Mist a little bit to like kind of convey the sense that the horror permeates above the table to even your character sheets, right? To even how the game works. That's how powerful this force is. It doesn't have to obey the rules of your little made up tabletop game, right? But that being said, I value my players' agency at the pinnacle of all of this. I wouldn't do this if they weren't bought into this and weren't enthusiastically agreeing to this, right? So something I'm going to ask my players tomorrow is I would love to get their input, like a temp check on like if they're cool with this generally speaking. And if they are, I suspect they are, but I'm open to them saying no too as well. Like any specific boundaries they might have around specific stuff I might pull, essentially. So examples of what I might do, I might add like mysterious tags or themes to their character sheet, similar to that like unnamed 3-box track for Arc 1 in the Wild Sea that I just foisted upon Sayir, right? I might change pre-existing tags or themes or spontaneously ask for rerolls. If you're confused about what tags and themes are, they're basically mechanics in City of Mist that inform how you can play. Right. So I recommend you checking it out. It's actually a really cool system. Examples of what I just won't do, no matter what, even if all my players are like, Connie, rip up my character sheet, take it, change who I am, make me into a monster. Like, even if all my players said that and were enthusiastically into it, what I just won't do as a GM is just take away what they can do wholesale. Just completely rob them of anything they might be able to accomplish. Because I think that's, first of all, not fun, and two, just kind of a jerk move, right? I also won't change like fundamental aspects of their character. Like if one of them, for example, Lumira is our healer slash nascent time mage. I won't be like, just kidding, you're a druid now. Bam. Like I'm not gonna do that, right? I'm gonna respect and honor what your character is all about. I'm also just not gonna completely negate a victory. I don't think that's fun. You know, like if they roll a crit on something or if they like do really well, I'm not gonna be like, just kidding, the monster gets away anyway, even though you rolled like the highest possible roll you could get, right? Like I'm not interested in that. So considerations for the mystery thriller with a dash of horror genre. Now moving on to our final touchstone before we move into some uncharted territory. Court intrigue. I love politics. I live for politics. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do in a tabletop session. So in addition to the mystery thriller aspect of Arc 2, there's going to be intense political intrigue. It's going to be rife with competing factions, with scheming nobles, with entangled plots. So if you've seen Kingdom on Netflix, it's basically medieval Korean zombie political horror. And if that intrigues you, watch it. It's really, really freaking good. It's going to be like Kingdom levels of balancing between thriller or horror and politics, or Game of Thrones, but obviously with like none of the misogyny and bizarre fantasy racism they have, and just straight up racism too. So basically the concept is strange and fantastical horrors and mysteries are afoot. And you also have to deal with these duds, these quarreling nobles vying for power at the same time, right? But it's not like they're completely unrelated. They are deeply intertwined, right? One side of the coin, one weave of the thread informs the other. So these schemers are going to influence the horror, the thriller, the mystery, the greater thing encompassing all of Arc 2, and vice versa. So I'm going to have a lot of fun playing with that as a GM. And I'm not going to give more than that away, because then I will actually venture into spoiler territory for Arc 2. And some considerations I have for my players under this particular point is, I think for any political intrigue session or campaign to be successful, it requires an active investment from the players to kind of be Sherlock Holmes and to like actively go out there and investigate and ask questions and be curious, right? So be interested in the NPCs that you meet, even if you think they're just random side characters, right? Be interested in the clues that might come up, right? When your GM describes like a location for you, like explore it. You know, don't just be like, I'm not interested, so I'm just gonna like, I don't know, go to the side and like do whatever, like polish my sword, whatever. Like be invested, right? Be interested on the plot threads that your GM might be laying out in front of you. And above the table, I think just as a player, it might be helpful to take notes because this arc is going to be significantly more intrigue heavy than Arc 1. There's going to be actual mysteries that I'm going to be expecting and hoping that they'll have fun with for the players to basically start piecing together the clues on their own, coming up with their own theories and unraveling the mystery, right? I'm not just going to tell them what's happening, right? That's part of the fun. I'm not going to just give you the answer, right? They're going to be exploring, they're going to be spontaneous, they're going to be improvising, they're going to do things I will not have accounted for, and I'm going to have to be spontaneous in return. And that is what I love about tabletops, right? So I want my players to feel empowered to be active, not just participants, but engines, story makers, and drivers in this quest, and like make the plot happen instead of just responding to the threads I drop in front of them, right? So it's one thing for me to be like, okay, here's this NPC, and for them to like go up to them and talk and ask questions. That's wonderful. That's great. I love it. And it's another thing for them to be like, okay, now I'm going to sneak into this NPC's bedroom at night and start picking through their boudoir for clues. That's being like an active story agent, because now then that makes narrative happen. Then they could get caught, right? They could run into a rival. Like all these things could happen that I couldn't have anticipated for, right? That you couldn't, necessarily do in a video game, right? Where there are rails, there are certain things you just can't do. Even in Baldur's Gate 3. So that also kind of comes with strong ideas loosely held, which is this other bullet point I have, this other player consideration, which, yes, 100%, please theorize in character and out of character as much as you'd like. That's part of the fun, right? Start piecing together things, start doing things, acting on your instincts and acting on your theories, right? But it's also really important to come to the table with flexibility, curiosity, and most importantly, a willingness and openness to not being right 100% of the time, all the time, right? So as a mystery arc, we're going to burn through wrong theories. That's just going to happen. The players are going to think one thing's going on, the audience might think another thing's going on, and a third thing could actually be going on, right? So just know that you're not going to get it right immediately or even the first few times necessarily, right? You could, but that's not the point of this arc. The point of this arc isn't to get the mystery right immediately and solve it and win, like by session 3, right? It's to explore what's around, come up with a few theories, and then like have fun hurtling toward the finale, right? By like stream 13, 14, 15. So like be okay with that, right? And be okay with not figuring everything out immediately. Don't get too attached to your theories, right? And be open to being spontaneous. Because you as a player might see something and be like, oh my God, okay, I know what's happening, brain blast, boom, this is what's happening, bam, 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 bam. And like, I might be sitting there as a GM and like think like, you know, no, not giving anything away, but in my head be like, oh, not quite, that's not quite what's happening. So it's important that even if you as a player and your character might be completely convinced that like A is happening, know that that might not always be the case, and basically like don't get mad, right, if you're proven wrong necessarily, right? And also don't be so funnel minded that you can only see your own theory and are only looking for ways to validate your own theory, because I've seen this happen sometimes to some tables, especially when it comes to like if there's a mystery happening, like someone gets really invested in their own theory and they get really upset when it ends up not being the case, or when the other players at the table are like, actually I want to try this thing instead, or they get upset when people aren't going along with what they think's happening, or they feel, I think, you know, this is maybe like the most extreme example, like they feel betrayed, like when it turns out that their theory isn't correct because we didn't have this conversation during session 0, or because they just came with assumptions about how things could be without giving the GM and the other players at the table a chance to even be able to like show them that something else is going on, right? So that's kind of like an extreme example, but it's good to bring up now so we're all on the same page about just like, okay, we could be wrong, boom, wonderful, let's move on, right? So I think on the flip side of this coin, what I can offer and guarantee and what I want as a GM is that I won't be so inflexible about like the grand mystery, the grand twist, right? As to like make the cool things you do, even if they're not quote unquote right, feel fruitless, right? So you might not always get something correct, right? Or like make the right assumption about what's happening. But if you put your heart into trying something, like if this player character sneaks into this person's boudoir and I know that this person's actually innocent, I'm not just gonna like give them absolutely nothing and have that attempt to be like completely fruitless. I'll give you something. You know what I mean? I'll give you a clue. I'll start to steer you in a direction that's like closer to being kind of right. You know what I mean? You'll get some kind of information out of it. That's what I can promise as a GM. And this way my players can feel empowered to take risks and do things, even if they know they might be wrong, because they know that nothing they do is going to be wasted. You know what I mean? I feel like that's something that some players worry about, is like, oh, like I don't want to take risks because what if I like mess things up for everyone and the GM punishes me? I am not a punishment or adversarially minded GM. So you'd never have to worry about that with me, right? Like you're never going to be hit with consequences that are unfun to play with. You know what I mean? And like that you didn't like want to sign up for, you know, like snooping around in this random noble's bedroom might not yield you the clues you were expecting, right? But it also means that, you know, the next day you wake up and someone dies because you snooped in this person's bedroom and you didn't want them to die. Like, I'm not going to do that to you because that's kind of a jerk move, right? So the final little thing that I'm just going to have a little bit written about, right? Going to breed some mystery around is God Killer. That's the final genre/system touchstone. If you don't know what God Killer is, it is a 2-person holy punk tabletop game that I wrote for 1 player, the God Killer, and 1 game master, God. I had a ton of fun writing it. The Ashcan is available on my itch, byconniechang.itch.io, and I'm currently I'm gonna be publishing the full version of this game next year with a publishing partner that I'm gonna announce like next year, which I'm really excited about. But essentially, the realm of Arc 2 is kind of going to be a future world for a God Killer project I have in the works that I'm not going to say too much more about. There's going to be elements of the game system layered into the world building of Arc 2, right? So the mist that I've talked about, the dream realm, is my take on the river. So if you're a God Killer stan, if you know what I mean about the river, things are going to start aligning, right? The devouring did happen in this world. Like, it's an event that did occur here, right? But don't worry too much about it. right? But do keep your eyes peeled about more God Killer goodness next year. And if you're interested in that project, or if you're like, what the hell is this thing? But it sounds interesting. Like you kind of want to know how it runs. The God Killer First Blood 16 episode miniseries is on Transplaner RPG's podcast feed. It's 16 episodes. Each episode is like an hour at most. It's a really great, what I call sampler platter of how we tell stories and like what you can expect when you want to listen to a Transplaner project. And it's only 16 episodes. It's already completely done. And it like I play God Killer. I'm the GM, and my producer / partner C Thomas, who's running this thing, is the player. And it's a really wonderful time. And you should check out that podcast if you want to see what I mean by God Killer. Anyway, now we're going to move into uncharted territory, stuff that I still need to work on. This is going to be where I actually start to answer your questions, and we're going to like co-work together and have like a chill hangout time. So go grab a drink, use the bathroom, take a bio break, grab some snacks. We're going to be hanging out for the next like hour or so. We're going to talk shop till I drop, till I want to stop, right? So we're going to just keep going till we want to stop. I might take a break or something, chill out. Let's hang out. So, Arc 2. The City of Heaven. Yes, let's get into the weeds here about the City of Heaven. So, an overview of the realm. You're going to see that this part of the doc looks a lot messier, so I'm going to be working on it while we go. The City of Heaven is both the name of the plane that Strike Team Nova is going to go to and a description of what it is. It's a heavenly realm, right? It's a realm for gods. It's a realm for divine beasts. It's a realm for the occasional high-ranking cultivator who are still mortals, right? But they're of a higher power level than just like a regular person off the street. It is a sister plane to Yaolan, the earthly realm, which literally translates to the cradle, which again, some God Killer stands might be raising an eyebrow at. And Yaolan is stitched, the City of Heaven is stitched within and above Yaolan, kind of like interwoven threads on a tapestry, right? So they're separate planes, but they're also like deeply intimately involved. You can't rip one out of the other, even though different kinds of beings live in different places here. So the City of Heaven is also a sister plane to the underworld, which is the realm of, and I stopped writing here, it's the realm of ghosts and demons, basically. So this kind of goes into what I mentioned earlier about like a Chinese take on ghosts and demons and whatnot. Basically, I think in like Chinese folk tradition, a ghost isn't necessarily like a translucent apparition that might appear after someone's died, right? They tend to have like flesh. They tend to actually be like physical beings, a gui, like a jiangshi or something, like, or if you've ever seen a xianxia piece of media or like read a novel based in this genre or any sort of Chinese fantasy, you know that like gui, ghosts are like physically embodied, right? They might kind of look like they're closer to zombies, I guess, than like Western interpretations of ghosts. And they are like the person after death arisen. It's what happens to you after you die. And there are different kinds of ghosts. There are ghosts that are like kind of chill. They can be peaceful in this world, right? There are some like chill, peaceful ghosts who like have died. They're in the underworld now. They're chilling out. There's also hungry ghosts and demonic ghosts as well, who are a little bit more aggressive. Maybe they had some unfinished business while they were alive. Maybe they were killed in a really violent and terrible way, or maybe they're just kind of like that. Maybe they were a jerk in life, they're a jerk in death, and like you killed them, but they're back to mess up your family tree. You know what I mean? Like any number of reasons why a ghost might be hungry or volatile or violent. Demons are non-human entities. They're like, they've never been people. Well, they are people, but they've never been human. Let's say they've never been mortals. Right? They are their own thing. They're kind of like gods in that way, in this world. A god in this world can either have always just been a god, and they're kind of interwoven with the natural world and just like natural phenomena in the City of Heaven, or you can become a god through ascension, right? You could have been a cultivator that's like cultivated your soul to like such a point that you achieve apotheosis and now you're a god, right? So there's two different kinds of gods. Demons are interesting in that there is the first camp of demons, similar to the first camp of gods, where they just manifest, right? They're just a manifestation of the natural world, but they belong to the underworld. That's their home, right? And the underworld is also a sister realm to Yaolan, like it's also stitched onto the earthly realm. All three of these realms are like intimately interwoven. Like you really can't rip any of them away from the other without destabilizing the fabric of their reality. And then the second camp of demons, this is actually some world building I'm going to do right now. I'm kind of torn. I'm kind of torn between if a cultivator who's achieved apotheosis could become a god or a demon. That's interesting. That's interesting. I'm gonna make a note for myself. Could become god or demon. That's really interesting. And like, what's really the difference, right? Like at the end of the day, I see a dramaturg's note from C. It says yes. I was so worried they were going to be like, absolutely not. So C, who's the producer, is also my dramaturg. If you don't know what that is, they're basically like a director slash editor slash player liaison slash character steward, right? They're the person that helps me world build, essentially, from my position, my perspective as a GM, how they interact with me. Yes, I'm into that. I think it's really sexy if a cultivator could become a god or a demon. It's just about maybe like the kind of cultivation you practice. Something I don't like, which is what Forgotten Realms does, and I think like Planescape, and I think like honestly, like almost any like a lot of D&D, is they tie morality is prescriptive, right? So it's lawful good is like this. Chaotic neutral is like this. It's prescriptive, right? It's instead of descriptive or like not inflexible, right? I don't like that. I don't like saying gods are good, demons are evil. That's not even even close to the kind of framework that we're using here. Like, I'm not even interested in using morality flags here. Like, I'm not even interested in saying this character is evil, this character is good. Like, I'm just not gonna do that because like I just don't like that. I think that robs characters of agency. I think it robs them of complexity. I think it really stunts your growth as a world builder. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. That's my opinion. So then the question is, then what is the difference between a god and a demon, right? Then in my brain, I think it's cultural. I think the difference is cultural. I think it's magical. I don't think it's ontological. I think it has to just do with cultural practices that have evolved through the interweaving of these three realms to then have one thing be known as demonic, one thing be known as like divine, right? And what's important about this is that there are always going to be subsects, right? Not all gods work the same way, which we're going to get into. There are 4 factions here, right? They might freaking hate each other. They might have like completely different divine legacies. You know, there might be even a god of famine, you know? They're a god of famine and prosperity. Now that's complex, right? That's interesting. There could be a demon who practices necromancy, right? But also gives life, you know, like a god of a demon of life and death, right? Or like an eagle demon who like terrorizes the skies, but also has like a nest that they take care of. Like, I don't know, something like that. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall, right? So what is the difference between a god and a demon? I don't know. That's something for me to figure out later. Figure out the differences between gods and demons. Cultural, magical practices, historical, right? Like the differences there could not even be any biological or even inherently magical differences. It could just be purely cultural and historical. Like maybe demons and gods are basically the same power level. They're like the same people, but like based on where they live, you know, it's just a choice that they make. Some of them, you know, like the vibes of the underworld better. Some of them like the vibes of heaven better. Like that could be it, right? I don't know. I'm figuring it out. This brings me to, I think, basically the cosmology of the City of Heaven and the Sister Realms, right? Underworld and the Cradle. So I've mentioned gods, I've mentioned demons. Kind of at the top of the pecking order here are gods. In terms of just, we're talking power level. We're talking like anime power level, right? Gods are at the top, right? They're really powerful. They're really strong. They're stronger than any other group. But within the group of gods, they could vary in power. So there could be petty gods, there could be minor gods, and then there could be like big important gods who could like shake the earth and like, you know, raise fields of warriors. And then we've got demons, I would say, in terms of power level, kind of close to gods, maybe slightly under. We also have a different class of people, the group of people known as cultivators, who are powerful mortals, like we've mentioned earlier, striving to attain godhood through cultivation. And then we've got regular mortals. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's just like the regular person off the street. You know, they could be a noble person or they could be a peasant, right? Like, doesn't matter, but they're still the same kind of person. And then we've got ghosts, who are basically what happens to mortals after they die. Like I mentioned, they could be peaceful or violent, right? And then demons who reside in the underworld. I bet here this stuff is not necessarily true anymore. Demons are non-human mortals similar to gods, but typically less powerful. Again, I'm working out the kinks, right? But yes, something I do want to stay consistent is that demons and gods live in the underworld realm, while mortals and like 99% of cultivators live in the cradle. Plain name TBD. Cradle, Yalan. Not Yolan. Yolan. So I have mentioned this before, that a few select high-ranking cultivators live in the city of heaven alongside the gods. Yes. So I'm thinking there are a couple of chosen cultivators who basically act as like clerks, um, apprentices, and champions, chosen champions of the gods, that they haven't ascended to godhood themselves yet, but they have been allowed to come into the city of heaven to assist the gods, that they ally with or worship or owe something, right up there, which allows us then to interact with mortals and not just gods in the city of heaven. Basically, this is my narrative my narrative justification for why there could be like mortals like in the city of heaven that the PCs could interact with, right? I came up with a reason for it. So an important note, which will be fun to play with, is that the mortal realm and the underworld, even though they are intertwined with the city of heaven, they are still considered different planes, right? So that means traveling from the city of heaven to like Yaolan, or like from the city of heaven to the underworld is not possible. So when trans agents are assigned to a plane, they can only go to that plane, or they can go back to trans, right? Like they can't go to other different planes. They don't have the clearance level, basically, like on their little trans-dimensional zapper thing. They just can't do it. So also, even if they figured out a way to do it, leaving their plane, even if they went back to trans, it's considered abandoning their mission. It's a failure. You get like an F on your report card, which is not something you ever want. You kind of like, once you get assigned a mission, you go down there, you stick it out till the end. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what it's like at the table. Whether or not the players decide to actually do that is up to them. They could decide, screw it, we'll get an F on the report card, but we have to go down there to see what's going on, right? And that's a fun thing for me to play with, because they know at the table what the stakes are. They could choose to break the rules anyway, right? And they could absolutely do that, right? That's a fun thing they get to do. So this is a little excerpt. I like to have things known as excerpts in some of like my lore sheets that I give my players, which is basically like, if you've ever played Destiny, it's like lore tabs, right? It's like just like a little thing in universe. It's either like an excerpt from a book, or from someone's journal, or from an epitaph, or a song, or like a dance choreography, anything that's like actually in the world that I put here that like lets them know more about the setting from the perspective of someone living there, or from like an in-universe perspective. Still working on this. Haven't figured it out yet, but I will flesh it out before tomorrow. And now you're going to see a bunch of, C doesn't like it when I call it this, but I mean it positively, a bunch of slop that I've written down here about gods, mortals, cultivators, demons, ghosts, etc. And now we're actually going to start working about I think the cosmology, and then we're going to get into NPCs and factions. There are 4 factions I've basically built that I'm going to be fleshing out a little bit. But before I dive into that, I'm going to take a quick break because I need a little sippy of water. And I also want to look at any of the questions that might have been collected by this point. So I don't see any pings in Discord, but I'm literally going to just like look at the chat, take a quick sip, drink some water with me, take a sip. I'm seeing some good discussion about divinity and morality in the Twitch chat. Someone's saying apotheosis is just being asked, what's your vibe? LOL. Yeah, true. What's your vibe? Why do you want a sense of godhood, right? I think that will determine the kind of god you become. If you are completely obsessed with vengeance, how are you going to expect to become anything but a god of pain and regret when you finally get there? You know what I mean? And I think there's something really delicious about that. How you live is how you ascend, right? I'm going to take a look at the TikTok chat. It's just a lot of people hyping things up. Hello, friends. Yeah. Okay, yeah, just a bunch of vibes. Okay, cool. If we've continued to just got vibes in chat and no questions or anything like that, I will continue. Seated flag, I skipped over what cultivators are in depth a bit. Ooh, that's true. Let me backtrack. Let me backtrack and talk a little bit about cultivators. So basically, cultivators are, like I mentioned, powerful mortals that try to cultivate their souls in order to attain apotheosis, right? And the in-depth of this is, in this realm, basically anyone can become a cultivator, right? And there are various different approaches to cultivators, even within Xianxia, like about how they work, how to become one, whatnot. So first, in some stories, like you have to be innately born, like to be, to be able to even cultivate your soul. I don't like that. I like the idea that anyone who tries hard enough could potentially ascend to godhood, but it's not just about trying hard enough, it's about sacrifice. So the path of a cultivator in this world is not a path to be tread lightly. It is the path of someone who's willing to give up everything in order to become a god. And what I mean by that is part of the price of becoming a cultivator is you lose the ability to be killed by another person. You lose the ability to die of old age. You lose the ability to have children. Gods can't have children in the city of heaven, and that is a specific world building thing that I'm going to be very specific about. Maybe for reasons down the line. Gods just can't produce heirs. And once you become a god, you give up the ability to do so. So there's some like interesting, I think, perspectives from some mortal folk who think that gods like intervene in mortal affairs as a kind of way to act out wanting to have a legacy because they can't have their own children. You know what I mean? That's one perspective that some mortals might take. Another is that because gods can't have children, they don't understand, what it means necessarily to have like a blood family. So they're cool with just like toying with people here or there. Again, these are individual perspectives that don't necessarily represent truths about the world and about what's actually happening. Something else about the relationship between gods, cultivators, and mortals in Arc 2, in the City of Heaven, is now we're going to start looking at the historical timeline of this place. Some number of years ago, the City of Heaven, Earth, and the Underworld were in a ton of turmoil. It's basically essentially a warring states period where gods were just going at it. They were just like they were fighting each other. The mortal realm was in disarray because of all this chaos, all this conflict. Tons of people, tons of gods died because a god can only be killed by another god in this world. If you're immortal, you're out of luck. You can't kill a god. You can't touch them, right? But another god could destroy another god and send them into the mist, send them into the dream realm, right? Like they discorporate, bam, their subconscious just goes to the mist. They return to the river whence they came. And then after a period of time, a mortal who achieved apotheosis, a cultivator who became a god, basically was like, hold on. This system, us just cannibalizing each other, the devouring is what this era was known as, right? Isn't working. This is bad, right? This is bad for everyone. So how about this? Gods, we will agree to not kill each other. We'll agree to like not cannibalize each other, not eat each other for power or pleasure or survival, whatever. And in return, we can settle our conflicts by waging proxy wars on Earth. So basically using mortals as chess pieces, as game pieces, right? So now these uber political factions have developed in heaven, basically, in the City of Heaven, as gods basically wage wars on Earth and use the different mortals, right? And where the mortals currently stand, how much land and power they control, they preside over as a signal for who's basically topping the leadership charts up in heaven. And the person who came up with this, the god who came up with this system, is now the immortal heavenly emperor, right? And her name is Longdu, and I'm really excited for y'all to meet her. She is the she who rose from poisoned flames. She is the immortal emperor of heaven. The Emperor Undying. Lock-2 reference. And over the course of thousands of years, you have to think about, like, what does this decree, what does this kind of world building do to a realm? A world where gods are bloodless, but still vicious, and the people that bear the brunt of the sacrifice, that bear the brunt of all these decisions and all these risks are mortals, right? Like, what does this do to a mortal community, right? What does this do to a divine community as well? And what does this do to cultivators who are like the only potential way for mortals to have a say, right, in what happens to them, to their destiny, to their future, right? And there's also something to be said here, because I'm all about complicating things. I don't want this to also come out as like, oh, all the gods are evil and they suck, right? Like, I'm also not interested in that. What does this say about like something that came out of a potentially good place? unbalancing the interdependent threads, right? Because heaven, earth, and the underworld are not separate planes that hate each other or like are always trying to take advantage of each other necessarily, though that might be happening in some ways right now. They are interwoven. They need each other, right? They are, we are all in a delicate ecosystem with each other. We're in community with each other. What that means is something I do here affects you over there. And this is like deeply, intimately felt in this triptych of planes. So what's happening now is essentially one of the three planes is kind of like out of balance with the others, and that's what's causing strife and chaos. It's not the fact that gods exist, right? It's the fact that like gods are not necessarily right now being proper stewards, right, of the natural world and of mortality and of their relationship with the underworld and with mortals, right? But the solution isn't necessarily just like get rid of all the gods. Honestly, that's like a bit too simple, like a bit too straightforward, right? Because the gods in this realm are the forces that make crops grow. They are what causes rivers to flow. They are what causes rains to fall. They are what causes fires to burn away forests so new growth can take root. So if all the gods were just gone, then that's bad too, because then there would be famine, there'd be drought, there would also be suffering, right? So like part of the longer term way of this world, because again, I do want this world to reappear in a future God Killer project, is asking these questions about balance, asking these questions about like the really complicated relationships we have with each other, and the question of like, what do we owe each other, and how can we be good caretakers of each other, and what are like the obstacles that might get in the way of that, right? As opposed to like the answer just being like, kill all the gods, right? Because that could be cathartic, but it could also, vengeance and revolution with nothing to replace it, might not necessarily be the kind of story I'm interested in telling at this table right now. So with that said, let's move on to the different factions of this realm. So you know where to scroll. I'm just going to continue going up here by the dramaturg's note. I'm going to like make a little bit of space here, and I'll bring up some stuff from the bottom of what I've written. Okay, this is going to be stuff that I'm excited to flesh out now. We're actually going to be building some stuff together, NPCs and factions. So as you see here, this is all I've got built so far, and we're going to build more of this together. So there are 4 primary factions that have risen to prominence now that proxy wars have begun, the devouring has ended, and a period of time now known as the game has begun, because the gods are treating mortals like game pieces. So these are the primary factions in the City of Heaven, who like control like 99% of mortal holdings on Earth. So there is the White Tiger Sect, the Black Tortoise Cult, the Vermilion Bird Clan, and the Azure Serpent Temple. And we're going to take some time now to flesh out each of these factions and what they mean. Let's do the ones that I actually have a bit more written for first. So let's start with the Vermilion Bird Clan. Oh, and these are obviously based off of the Sixiang, which are the 4 symbols in like Chinese traditional mythology. It's like 4 different colors, 4 different divine beasts, basically, that guard the 4 different directions. I'm not going to worry too much about the directions necessarily, or even about the elements that they represent, but I just thought they were cool. Honestly, they're cool. It's Chinese, and I want to pull on it, right? And like some of the temperaments associated with some of these animals might, come out in how each faction operates. But I don't want it to be like bioessentialist either. You know what I mean? So before I actually get started, an overview about factions. So each faction is its own mini society within the City of Heaven. And what this means is it's not like, for example, the White Tiger Sect is like the palace guards of heaven, and like the Vermilion Bird Clan are like the cooks and the chefs. Like they all have their own military and clerical and political factions within. They're like more like kingdoms, honestly. They're like mini kingdoms within the City of Heaven. So I'll say that. Each faction is its own mini kingdom within the City of Heaven, known for different magical practices, heritages, and approaches to, and I'm going to have like a much prettier way to put this, but for now, conflict resolution. So like how do they approach things? Like what makes them different? Like what is their specialty, right? They can of course have specialties, but they all have their own branches of everything. So starting with, Vermilion Bird Clan, so what's important for me from a high level for each of these 4 factions is that they feel distinct, that they feel these factions should feel distinct. They should also feel, they shouldn't be stereotypical, right? I don't want to do like barbarian warriors. That's like, we've already seen that a million times. Also, it's also like kind of offensive, right? What else is going to guide me as I make these? On the flip side of they shouldn't be stereotypical. They should be unique, imaginative, and or innovative in some way. And of course, they should abide by non-colonial, anti-orientalist approaches to world building. What that means is I'm not gonna have like a co-op faction. You know what I mean? There's no cops in heaven. So looking at the Vermilion Bird clan, these are like these little comma things are basically things I want associated with this clan, and I'm thinking about ways that this can manifest, right, in their principles, in their magical practices, in their heritages, and their approach to handling stuff. So I was thinking that the Vermilion Bird clan are stewards of knowledge. They're basically like gentlefolk scholars, right? They prize history, they prize erudition, they prize elegance, right? Flames, beauty, temperance, knowledge. So all these four things put together, what does that make, right? So I was thinking like there could be a cool thing where they like write books, they write tomes by scorching characters onto paper with flames produced at the tips of their fingers, which shows temperance, restraint, right? They don't burn the paper away, right? Like, but it's also beautiful, right? Calligraphy, it's beautiful, right? Scholarship, they're writing books, you know what I mean? So that kind of cultural practice binds off four of these things together, right? Something else about them. Now let's think about character. I'm thinking the Vermilion Bird clan is headed by a matriarch. I always come up with names last because names I could spend like 7,000 hours on just like coming up with names. I'm not going to do that right now. But I think it's headed by a matriarch, right? The Vermilion Bird, right? Her divinity manifests as a phoenix, Feng Huang, or Chu Vermilion Bird. And she, she's what the clan is named after, right? Something else to note is that each faction is populated by gods that have pledged fealty to the leader of that faction, as well as various cultivator, scribes, minor gods, etc. Like basically clerical workers. So this matriarch, let's think about her. Let's think about what she's like. And I'm not necessarily going to say what each of their motivations are, because that's part of the political scheming. That would be a little spoilery, right? If I just like straight up say like this person wants to kill this other person, and we know that already, right? So let's think about their personality a bit. I always like to flesh out. So there are some things I'm going to leave blank that I'm going to work on offline. I always like to flesh out goals, strategy for achieving those goals, overall strategy / temperament, personality, and appearance, right? And maybe like special powers. And if my dramaturg has any other notes, I see their cursor coming up here. Please just let me know, see. Great question from Drac. Does the Black Tortoise cult call themselves a cult? Yes, because in Chinese, actually, so it would be weird, I think, in English to have a group that calls themselves a cult. But in Chinese, the translation of cult doesn't have the baggage of like your weirdos that are heretics necessarily, right? It doesn't have that baggage. So they would just be known as the Black Tortoise cult, and it doesn't have the same kind of weighted oomph as calling some like a group of people a cult might in some Western world building. And this is something specifically found in Xianxia as well. Like in I think in Modao Zushi, there are sects that call themselves cults, and it's like not necessarily a bizarre thing. So that is a good question. I'm glad you raised it. And that's maybe something I can even bring up to the players tomorrow. I'm going to say metatextual note. Cult is not a negative term, simply descriptive. Yeah. And I also wanted to give each, part of why I call them a cult as well, is I wanted to give each group a group name that wasn't just like the White Tiger sect, the Black Tortoise sect, the Vermilion Bird sect, the Azure Serpent, that's all the same, right? So I wanted there to be a sect, a cult, a temple, and a clan. Which feel different enough, right? But also similar-ish. Good question. Moving on, are there any other things I need to flesh out for this matriarch? No. So let's think about her overall strategy. This is going to be how she solves problems, right? Which is obviously related to her personality. I'm also gonna say pronouns. I'm feeling she, they. Am I supposed to be like, do I want to be risque? I want to throw something else in? What if, this might be a lot, but what if all of them also had ta pronouns? You know what? I'm just gonna do that. She, they, ta. Okay. Ta is a Chinese pronoun. In Chinese, it's like ta is a pronoun. Ta, da, there. Ta, them. Or he, or she, or it. But what I like about it is that you can't tell gender based on how it's spoken. So there we go. It also feels very like diasporic trans-queer to me. Chinese to me. My sexuality is Chinese. Okay, so overall strategy. Flame's beauty, temperance, knowledge. She's gonna be subtle, right? She's gonna be extravagant. At the same time, I love contradictions. So her true motives, cloaked in flame. Ooh, cloaked in flame. She's out there. She's gorgeous. She announces herself. But all of that is a beautiful charade that hides what they're really up to. So it's something about they cloak their moves in divinity. So they don't move in shadow. They move in bright radiance. They dazzle. Ooh. They dazzle with elegant showmanship in order to misdirect and achieve ulterior motives. That could be fun. That could be fun. I'm not gonna. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna move on to their personality. And now that I'm coming up with a strategy, I'm wondering if that is too much of a spoiler even. Like, I feel like the players shouldn't know what their strategy is, right? So maybe this is just a secret between us. Maybe this is just a secret between us, and I'm gonna hide this in this. And for what that means moving forward is that I'm not gonna flesh out the overall strategy for the other players at the table. Personality. Oh my god. Like, I'm sensing flamboyant. Flamboyant is maybe not the right word. I'll find the right word later. I'm sensing flamboyant, but not kishy. You know? Like, yes, makeup, hair, jewelry, outfit, but it's like not too much. You know what I mean? It's like not too much. It's elegant. It's like almost too much, but they can pull it off. Ta can pull it off. You know what I mean? Like, it takes a special person to be able to pull it off, but can pull it off. Very like hyper intelligent, to the point of it being scary. Can read someone in a glance, like a book, right? Very, very scholarly, erudite, well learned. Can talk circles around someone. Can insult you without you even knowing that it's an insult, right? And I'm thinking, like, they always, it's like they roll out of bed in 6-inch heels. You know what I mean? Like, you will never catch them lacking. Like, you will never catch them without like a full face of makeup that looks effortless and beautiful. You know what I mean? That's how their divinity manifests. They're a phoenix. They're a vermilion bird. They preen. There's an amount, there's a degree of preening here, right? And that can maybe look into the flaws. They could be vain. That's a potential flaw. They could be vain. They could also be, they could be knowledge seeking to like a negative degree, right? Like, where they're willing to give up anything for knowledge, right? Just about anything for knowledge, including their own allies / safety. Like, I feel like this character has like screwed people over before in order to attain a scrap of knowledge that will then like serve them later. You know what I mean? That feels like a good place to start. Appearance? I don't know, but I want there to be something red. Obviously vermilion, duh, right? Like, God, the vermilion bird clan. Can you imagine them rolling up? It's like a funeral garb. That'd be hilarious. Some degree of vermilion to it. Red. I'm thinking gold. Classic. Right? I'll figure out the rest later. Maybe honestly like jewel tones is kind of what I'm reading. Special powers, I mean, fire is the obvious one, right? But I also don't want to be too obvious. Fire, flight, is that too? And she's a firefighting type. We'll get more into that later, I think, but this is a good place to start. Goals, I'm also gonna like not talk about too much right now. Okay. This is a good starting base. I'm gonna do starting bases for all of them first. Let's move on to the Black Tortoise cult. So, things that I want associated with a Black Tortoise cult: marshes, rituals, miasma, nightmares. They're fun dudes. So they're basically heaven's emissaries to the underworld, right? They broker deals between gods and demons, and they maintain the tenuous peace between these realms. So what kind of a person would lead this faction, right? What kind of a person would drive this faction to action? Would be the one to liaison. If you saw that, my dramaturg is writing Harrow Hark no Negesimus, which is from the Lock Tomb series, which I'm fucking obsessed with. Oh, I'm so sorry, TikTok, which I'm unalive obsessed with. Which I'm really obsessed with. I'm sorry, I need to stop. Just let me stop talking. Okay. Harrow Hark no Negesimus. Yes. Oh my god, yes. Yes. I'm sensing Harrow Hark. I'm sensing someone kind of weird. Someone kind of like from Arc 1, a little bit like Prin Him Soo-hyun meets Harrow Hark. Is that like, that might be too much, but I love it when they're too much. Yeah. I think they're headed, weirdly enough, I either want the leader of this place to be really old or really young. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? I'm thinking either a prodigy or someone, or like a tortoise, like someone who's been around the block, like a couple of times. And I'm kind of torn. Like, I don't know. Let's, my gut is almost, because that's part of what makes Harrow Hark so compelling. She's so young. I almost kind of want, like, I don't want to step on Sayer's toes either, because I immediately was thinking Omen Speaker, but that might step on Sayer's toes a little too much. But I was thinking like a prodigy, like a really young oracle of some kind. Like, I don't know, that's kind of what I'm feeling. Let's just explore that feeling. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? Strong ideas loosely held. We'll revisit this and do something else if this doesn't work. Okay, headed by a prodigy, an oracle, something adjacent to an Omen Speaker. Let's see. Pronouns, goals, strategy, personality, flaws, appearance, special powers. Okay, special powers, prophecy. Prophecy through nightmares. That's pretty similar to Sayer. We'll figure out ways to distinguish them later. And Sayer, if you don't know, is one of the PCs, right? So that's something else I always keep in mind when I'm making NPCs. I don't want them to like infringe on what makes the PC special necessarily. There can obviously be foils, there can obviously be mirrors, there can obviously be people, like-minded people, but I don't want them to be like exactly the same or like take away the PC's shine. You know what I mean? Prophecy through nightmares. Illusions, maybe? Water magic. Ritualistic magic, the occult, right? Let's see, personality. I'm thinking someone, and I also don't want to repeat NPCs I've done before in Arc 1. I am feeling something, someone like Harrow Hark, very stoic, maybe. Let's go with someone stoic, because we've got someone flamboyant here. Maybe this person could be stoic. They could be stoic. They're a little weird, right? I think they're really kind of bizarre, but we have to figure out what kind of weird, because weird is a little too generic. What if they're stoic and like unguardedly says what's on their mind, sees people's, hold on, that might be a special power, can see people's worst selves, worst sides, greatest fears. I'm thinking if we want to like channel Harrow Hark a bit more, very confident, bordering on arrogant, but they deserve it. There might be a part of them that relates more to the to the underworld denizens that they broker with than the gilded palaces of the city of heaven. That's interesting. I'm thinking either this or they have a hardline stance against the factions of the underworld. But I'm more compelled by the first one. Honestly, I think so. Strategy, I'm not gonna flesh out for obvious reasons. Pronouns, I'm thinking just they them. I don't know if they'd use she or he or a neo pronoun outside of that. Maybe a neo pronoun, I'm not sure. But right now, at least they them, I think. Or like kind of around they. Maybe Z. Maybe Z. Yeah. I love a little they zeta. Say that to an orphan from the 18th century, see their mind implode. Yeah. Flaws. Maybe they don't trust anyone. Because they're aware of people's worst selves. So maybe they like play their cards really close to their chest and it's hard for them to make genuine allies. Hard to make genuine allies, plays cards close to their chest because they know people's worst selves, impulses, what they're capable of. Confident, born American. I feel like I needed like one more thing to flesh out the personality and be able to move on, I think. I feel like I'm missing like one thing. I think what I'm missing is some vulnerability. Yeah, maybe. Okay. So on this point, when they relate to the underworld denizens more, maybe they're able to see a genuine sense of community. Ooh, within the demons, ghosts, and cultivators of the underworld that is not currently reflected in the city of heaven. Yeah, and also there's the question of like, there is something occult about them. So like, what's that weird thing they do? Maybe, okay, so let's revisit the conversation about the difference between gods and demons. I feel like the Black Tortoise cult is the closest to like demons in terms of maybe what they practice, right? So this also goes into like what does differentiate godly magic from demonic magic. And I'm gonna just make a note to myself here about that. The Black Tortoise cult is the closest heavenly group to demonic magic. Figure out what makes them more aligned with the underworld and what those differences are. Exactly. Okay, I think I have a little bit here for the Black Tortoise cult. I'm going to move on. Ooh, I have like the same amount of not fleshed out for White Tiger or Azer Serpent. Let's do White Tiger. So the things I currently have are Steel, Instinct, Pride, and Precision. So tigers, I mean, come on. I'm thinking I'm sensing these are the jocks. Get what I mean? I'm thinking if the Vermilion Bird Clan are the See, you have to stop me from talking. I'm thinking Once upon a time, no high school AU. The preps, the jocks, the goths, and the normies lived in harmony until the goths attacked. Okay. C's saying no. C's saying call it quits. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna move on from the factions. I think I'm getting a little bit too much into the weeds here. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna flesh out the rest of everything on my own. And even if you might have tuned into this world building stream and seen me build out these characters, like I said, be open to them changing. There might be things about them that are different in how they come out. Because I also don't want to get too spoilery. Okay, moving on. Let's do something else before we call it. Because my little tummy's starting to get a little rumbly, starting to get a little hungry. And I just want to do one last thing before I wrap things up. So I think the last thing I want to do is maybe just have like a kind of final roundup of thoughts about what it means to be building out Arc 2 as a diasporic Chinese person. Yeah, because this is gonna be very culturally specific. This is gonna be the most culturally specific arc, or or season of any show on Transplanar outside of, I think, like when we went into arc 4 for the second Stranger, because then we were going into Too Long, which, as you can maybe guess from the name of this place, was also modeled off of Chinese culture, in a lot of ways Tang Dynasty China, which is always the dynasty people draw on, right? But for me, whenever I think about historical fantasy, I know that it conjures up a lot of like Gaslamp, steampunk, clockwork, Euro, London, Western Europe, maybe some Eastern Europe, I'm not sure. Like, but that's usually what comes up in the Western imagination, right? So for me, it's really important that historical fantasy is rooted in my own specific lived experience and my own culture, like my own heritage and my ethnicity, right? Like it's important for me to draw on these things, not just because like I want to rip who I am, but because this kind of fantasy just speaks to me more as a creator, right? Part of it is because we've already seen the Gaslampy, like whatever, like kind of version of historical fantasy, like we've seen it a lot. There's a huge breadth and depth of work working it within those particular genres. I kind of want to do something different. And I want to do something that honors the fact that I'm diasporic, right? I'm not a Chinese national, right? I'm not a mainlander. I'm not I did grow up in China, but I am also American, like I'm also, right? I'm hyphenated. And that's something that I'm very proud of. And that's something that I think that I am uniquely positioned based on my own like personal lived background and my cultural touchstones to be able to talk about, right? That's also why I'm such a big champion of using Tada pronouns, right? It feels very diasporic to me. Like it is Chinese, yes, but I also feel like there's like straight and cis Chinese people, Chinese mainlanders might not get that, right? They're gonna be like, what? They're gonna be like, oh, that's such a Western American way, right? They're gonna be, like, so there's something like deeply diasporic about my approach to it as well. I think I mentioned something earlier about, you know what? About horror, I think. And the specific like Chinese ways of thinking about horror. When I was a kid growing up, my mom would always tell stories about ghosts. And the ghosts she would describe would be like a chopped off foot hopping along a dusty country path, right? You would hear it like slap against the dirt at night, like on its way to do whatever things that chopped off ghost feet do, right? Or actually technically chopped off ghost leg, 大白腿, right? Big white leg is what it was called, right? A disembodied limb, right? And that was seen as a ghost. Xiao Lan Ya was another horror story my mom would tell me about this like cannibal with like blue teeth, and like that was also seen as a ghost, right? So like I think definitions of what a ghost is, definitions of horror, there's also always that I think very human thread across cultures of like wanting to tell scary stories around a campfire, about like, as a form of processing terrible things that happen, or a form of catharsis, or a form of just like, sometimes you just want to tell creepy, scary stories, to our friends and to our family. Like that's just part of like a human experience, right? But something that's also very specific to me is horror as a way of like weirdly enough like community building, you know what I mean? So I don't approach horror as a way to just like traumatize my players, right? Or like get some sort of like weird power trip out of it. Or to be like, oh, we're so grim dark, bro. Like, look at how dark I can get. Look at these terrible things. I'm gonna throw it. No safety tools at my table. Like that's just so like, why are you posturing, bro? You know what I mean? That's not what draws me to horror and grim dark genres, right? What draws me to it is the same thing that what draws me to dark fantasy, which is finding the light at the bottom of the well. There's something, the darker we get, the brighter the dawn will seem. And like that was something that I really wanted to hammer home at the end of the second Stranger. And something that I'm interested in exploring, especially as we tangle with themes of denial, under the larger topic of grief for arc 2. It's going to be a really fraught arc. All of these arcs are going to be really fraught. Positive, right? They're going to be really intense, positive. So it's important to me that horror, the themes of horror here aren't used as a way to like hurt my players or bludgeon them, right? Or like make them feel bad, right? But as a way for them to also experience catharsis in some way, to be able to like look the darkness in its face, reach out to it, cup it on the side of its face and say, I see you've got blue teeth. Me too. You know? And like maybe there's something terrifying about that. But, you know, my PCs are also scary. You know, my PCs can dance with the devil, right? And they can see what's beautiful about the devil. So that's kind of where I'm at about this, and that's kind of going to be the heart of this as well. Like when I talk about mystery thrillers with like a sepulchral beating mushy heart of horror, when I talk about dashes of psychological torment or whatever, like yes, these are fun, and like I'm really excited to build these like messed up encounters and like, you know, make those like intense like TikTok clips, right? Like where we see the incredible encounters, like unhinged encounters happening. But more so than that, I think it's about recognizing each other's humanity through monstrosity and each other's monstrosity through humanity. I mean, that's what I'm about constantly, all the time, at the end of the day. I think that's a good place, you know, kind of maybe to wrap things up. I'm gonna just do like one last call for questions. If any of you have any questions about any of this arc 2 or anything else related to the stream, related to any of the topics or themes I've brought up, I'm going to take a quick sippy from my Arizona iced tea. I'm not sponsored by them. God damn, I gave them a free product placement. I should not have done that. I should always charge for product placement. I'm going to cover the label. But yeah, I'm going to drink this. Drop your questions in the chat if you have any. I'm stalling you every time to think of any. So you're welcome. All right, I've had a nice, long, luxurious conversation with myself. A luxurious sip. I'm going to see if we have any questions. I'm thinking, I see some in Twitch. Someone, I think this is a rhetorical question, but how do you remember it all? I need help. I don't. I don't remember it all. I write it down. Write it down somewhere. Somewhere that you know you will check. And it's gonna happen regardless, but try your best to not spread out too many of your thoughts over too many platforms. Like I have a physical notebook. Several. I have multiple physical notebooks. I also have like a Google Drive with like way too many folders and way too many documents. But at least they're and a Discord server where I put random notes in. So don't be like me. Don't do that. That's something you should do. But it's better to write something down somewhere than to not write it down at all. I have ADHD. I often come up with random ideas in the middle of like washing the dishes or taking a shower or like about to go to bed. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'll remember it in the morning. I will not. I don't care if you're about to step into the shower and you get hit with an idea. I don't care. As long as you're like not driving or something, like obviously any of the time. Right. But like take out your phone, put it in your notes app, or better yet, have like a private Discord server somewhere you can return to easily and interface with regularly. So whether it's Discord, because I know we're all on Discord. If you're queer and you have ADHD, you're on Discord and you're in way too many servers for your own good. That's right, I'm talking to you directly. I'm talking to myself too. Put it in a private Discord server, put it in a PM to somebody you trust. I don't know, I don't care. Put it down somewhere. Write down the thought, and then make sure you can revisit it later, right? I have a place in my private Discord server that I have with C. Thomas where it's just like Connie brain dump. Like I just put everything that I just randomly think of there and I organize it later, right? So just have a place, have a first location for you to put your thoughts into. That's my response. The other question that we have is from Stardiers, who says, oh, thank you, Bronzy_0 for that first question. Stardiers says, do you have a program you keep all your notes in for better organization? Google Drive, Google Docs. It works for me. I like it. I like that you can make basically chapter headings. And I like to organize it based off of that. And that's also what I GM with. I GM with Google Docs. So I have a Google Docs of my GM notes pulled up alongside like my players' faces, and I like refer to my notes and then like go back to my players. It works for me because I like the quick reference tab of like the chapter headings. Basically, I can like tab between sections easily. And I've just like used Google Docs like for like years and years and years and years. I know some people use other programs. Some of like World Anvil, or like a wiki even that they build. This is just what's true for me. It could work for you, or like a Notion. I know some people use Notion. The startup cost of that, in terms of not like money necessarily, but like the effort of sitting down, making it pretty. If I have to make anything pretty, and this is what some people love. Some people love making stuff pretty. So like if you're into that, go for it. But I hate it. Like it's just not that I hate it. It's just I spend so many of my energy tokens on making a document look pretty that I don't actually do work on it. So it's kind of like the SpongeBob meme where he spends like an hour writing the T, like on that piece of parchment. Like that's kind of the startup cost for me for like a program like that. And that's why like it doesn't quite work for me. But if it works for you, then I recommend it. Recommend using it. I know that there are also some platforms trying to become like a one-stop shop to like all of your TTRPG needs. Like I know Roll20 is trying to be the place where you can store anything and everything, not just a place for not just a VTT, but like a character vault, a place where you put GM notes, right? I know they're evolving that direction. So that might be something that you might want to look into. A lot of people know Roll20 at this point, but they're like genuinely trying to like upgrade their UI to make it look a bit more modern and sleek. I know some really good people are working on it too. So that's a thing. But honestly, it's whatever system Bart like ignoring all the fancy brand names, ignoring all the bells and whistles, like all of that stuff is secondary. What's primary is a system that you can consistently come back to and work on. That is the most important thing. So if what works for you consistently is just like a notebook, organize the hell out of the notebook. You know what I mean? Like keep using a physical notebook. Like it's just about finding what works for you. Okay. Moving on to another question. Let's see. It is a question from Kai is Delavan Lodgers, who plays Zion and says, C remembers it all. They do. They remember it all for me. We have a question from BlinkDog182. That's such a funny name. BlinkDog182. I'm not going to be able to think about Blink-182 any other way. Any book recommendations for world building and storytelling in general? I'm always amazed by your work. Thank you so much. That's very sweet of you to say. Honestly, for storytelling in general, look at screenwriting books. Honestly, you will learn very early on that plot, character, and world are the exact same thing. And that is something that like screenwriting and screenwriters nail down. Like in your first class, you learn what story is, right? And like that, I think just as if you have a fundamental understanding of that, then you can start to play with the form and like disturb it, right? And expand upon it and like do it really well. So I would honestly look into screenwriting books. Ooh, there's this one called like the story. Was it the story? The building blocks of story. It's something I read in high school that was a really good starter text. I don't quite remember what it's called. People always reference Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. I think you can look at it, but don't take his word as law. A lot of people like try to organize their screenplays based specifically on his beat sheet. I wouldn't do that if I were you. But Save the Cat is a good thing to look at to see what people are saying about screenwriting and about story, but do not take it with a grain of salt. Do not take it as law. It's a good place to start, just to think about 3-act, technically 4-act structure of story. World building. Honestly, read books with worlds that you admire. So I am a really big fan of the Locked Tomb series. I think the world building is really excellent, both in terms of like what the world is like and also in terms of how it's presented to the reader. I think a number one complaint that some people have that turns them off of that series is they're too confused. Like they drop it and it's like all these proper nouns. You know what I mean? They drop it and they're like, what the hell is a myriad? Like what the hell is the necromantic emperor undying? Like what does that mean? But you kind of just have to go along with it. Just like sit down, buckle down, go along with it for like the first 5 chapters. And if at that point you don't like it, then you're not going to like the series. But at that point, if you're like bought in, you are bought in for the entire rest of your life. For the Locked Tomb, like honestly, I find it to be a very polarizing text. Positive because it has a very strong style, and I like books with strong styles. Locked Tomb series. For historical fantasy, fantasy, historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy. I think She Who Became the Sun, and I think the sequel is He Who Drowned the World. I haven't read that yet, but She Who Became the Sun is really good, specifically for historical fantasy. It's like influenced a lot of my own approach to world building, and like the author does really queer things. It's like their take on pre-Ming Dynasty China, during I think like the Yellow Turban or like the Red Turban, some kind of colored turban, rebellion. It was when basically uh there's essentially like a conflict between the Mongol emperors and rulers of China versus like a rebellion coming up, but it's about like the next emperor of China, but envisioned as like it's really good, but as like a woman who like disguises her gender and then becomes genderless and then becomes it's really trans, really queer, really really cool world building, nice prose. I was like bought in from like the first line, honestly. Other book recommendations for world building and storytelling. Read poetry. Yeah, I would say read stuff that doesn't have a Western straightforward narrative. So I'd look into like there's Convenience Store Women, which is by a Japanese woman. It's like a modern Japanese novel or novella. I would like look into books. If you only speak English or read English, like look into translated books by like other writers. And I would be remiss right now if I also didn't mention like, like I would recommend like researching some like Palestinian poets and authors, right? And like reading about them. And I think like the more that we diversify the media we intake, the more richly we're able to make our own worlds. Because if the only thing you're reading is like Brandon Sanderson, then you're only going to be able to imagine Brandon Sanderson-esque texts. I don't know if you can tell, but I don't like him. Anyway, I'm gonna like not say too much about that anyway. But move on. Thank you for the question, Blink Dog 182. Erica Rose 2187 says, how/which app do you use for world building? I feel like I answered this already. I don't. I'm sorry, Erica. I don't. I just sort of like write stuff. I just sort of like hallucinate and then write it down. I hope that was helpful. Draconics has a question. Can a demon become a god or vice versa? Now, that's a really interesting question about this world. I need to nail down the specifics. I'm kind of thinking that the distinction between god and demon is not biological. I think it's just the title you take for yourself. So it's kind of like asking like, can a farmer become a lawyer or vice versa? Like, yeah, they can. If you go to law school or like if you learn how to use a hoe without breaking your back, like, yeah, you know what I mean? Can you tell I'm not a farmer? Can you tell I'm a city kid? So I'm thinking yes. I'm the more I think about the distinction between gods and demons in this world, the more I'm leaning toward it being like purely titular, purely cultural, like purely just like political, as opposed to like magical. You know what I mean? Like I'm honestly kind of leaning in that direction. Moving on. Question from Erica again. Oh no, was just talking about Scrivener. Sorry. The Cartoon Addictive Games question: how long have you been running / playing tabletops? Oh my god. Maybe 6 years now. Is that the case? Maybe 5 or 6 years. Yeah, I like started maybe in college. Yeah, I'm like an older Gen Z. So it not super long, like half a decade. So yeah, decent when I put it that way. Yeah. But I've been telling stories since like I was a child. I would actually like I actually talked about this on Adventuring Academy a year ago at this point with Brennan. I would like hold court because my mom owned a children's museum in China, and I would like hold court with like I was like 5 and the kids were 3, and I would like hold court and like make them listen to me tell stories, and I would like always I would tell like horror stories and make them cry as like a 5-year-old, and like they'd all go crying, but they always came back for more. You know what I mean? Like these 3-year-olds would be crying, they'd run back to their parents, and they'd come back and be like, and then what happened? Right? But then I had to stop because I got in trouble with the parents. But you know what? I've been traumatizing my players ever since I was a child. Literally ever since I could come up with a cogent narrative in my head. So storytelling ever since I was a kid. For the longest time I thought I would be a novelist. Maybe still will. Who knows? And then I dabbled in screenwriting. That's what I went to college for, and critical race studies. So I've been like writing, storytelling, reading all of that. I also was in a this is a fun fact about Connie. I was in a improv troupe since 7th grade through 12th grade, and then through all of college. I joined my my college improv troupe. Fun fact about Connie. I was actually on the same improv troupe as Io Debris. She went to my high school. We went to the same school, and they were my co-captain for a number of years. But anyway, moving on. Question from your underscore feller. Hello, first time chatter. How do you plan on making twists or traumatic events for characters, and how? I feel like this stream was how I do that. I mean, it starts with character. It starts with like a good twist is one that actually hurts. You know what I mean? It's one that players, not just their characters, but the players care about. So that's also why I'm a character-driven GM, is because everything I make is based on what matters to my players' characters. And in return, I have really wonderful players. I've been blessed with an incredible cast. They care about my world, right? And they like actively invest in my world, and they like want to know what's happening, and they care about the NPCs, which you know, I'm very grateful for. And they're lovely, incredible performers and actors. But yeah, the twists start with the characters. You know, it starts with like what would punch this character the hardest, right? And like how can I expand that to like also talk about the story, right? Traumatic events. I would use them with intention. Trauma. Trauma is a scalpel to me. You have to be surgical with it, right? You can't just kind of like, you know, trauma at your players. Because first of all, I feel like that's a little irresponsible. Second of all, like, you know, best case scenario, your players just kind of are like, okay, yeah, we're gonna get, you know, every episode's good. Something terrible's gonna happen to us. You know, it's also about balancing tone. So you don't want your sessions to, if your sessions are just grim, if they're just traumatic, then it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, what makes trauma matter is that there's something to fight for, is that there is light, that there is something else, right? Especially for a long-term campaign, you have to be able to balance tone. And I say this as someone who loves drama and trauma and like serious storytelling. I would not call the Chaos Protocol or any of Transplators, definitely flagship campaigns, comedic. We're not a comedic series, right? We definitely have funny moments because we're not funny people, but that's not the focus of what we do. We're not like, we didn't come from stand-up, we didn't come from late night, we didn't come from, except for myself, like improv, right, necessarily. And so some of us do have training in these areas. Like, we're coming together to tell a dramatic story, like a serious one that isn't like laugh hour. You know what I mean? So it's about like pacing out these traumatic events and making them matter, right? Because if you're just traumatizing your players for the sake of like traumatizing them, I don't know, it kind of loses its impact. You know what I mean? Like, it's much better if you're able to surgically punch them with that scalpel, metaphorically. So moving on from, again, the Cartoon Addict 2 games. Is there anything that you can tell us about the new main NPC for this arc, like personality-wise, or just any nuggets that I can have? Oh, I know we're desperate. Okay, first of all, they're so cute. That's what I can tell you. They're really cute. They're, I really like their design. They're, you know, I'm just gonna gayrist it. For sure. What I can say is non-binary twink with so many issues, which I know is like everyone's type, like almost everyone's type in this chat. So yes, you can be very excited about meeting them. I'm excited to meet them too. They're gonna be similar to some characters I played in the past, but also very different. I don't think I've ever played anyone exactly like them before. They're very smart, I'm gonna say. Moving on. Another question for Cartoon Addict 2 games. I'm pretty bad at improvising, especially with description. Is there any tips for writing more broad or more broadly? Yes. When you're trying to improvise descriptions, I actually have like Oh, I also want to say, very important note, that in terms of like the trauma thing, any and all traumatizing of the players needs to come explicitly co-signed by the players themselves. Like, you cannot, and this is something that we do at the Chaos Protocol. We have so many session zeros. From the beginning, all of my players are like, yes, I want you to hurt me. Like, every single one of them is like, hurt me. These are the ways I'm okay with being hurt. These are my lines, right? These are things these are boundaries that you should cross, and I don't. You know what I mean? You cannot, you shouldn't. don't do this, to just throw trauma at players who have no idea that that's what's coming. Like heavy trauma. You know what I mean? Like you want to make sure that your players are cool with it and sign up for it. Like that's I just assumed that we were all on the same page about that, but I realized that's something that needs to be said, right? Like and I'm gonna actively say it. So I am a proponent of safety tools. In addition to that, of open and honest communication. That's what makes safety tools work, right? So you need to have some sort of tool set, whether the tool set is just we'll talk to each other because we've known each other for 10 years, we know how each other act. That's practicing safety at your table. I don't know what to tell you, right? So like safety tools, open and honest communication, and consistent communication as well. It's always better to over communicate than to under communicate. Anyway, back to the descriptions. I actually have a TikTok about this. It's under Professor Chang's. It's under my playlist that says Professor Chang's. You just like honestly scroll past it. It's about descriptions. And I think, can I remember my own tips? It's like focus on the 5 senses, right? And like pick like 2 or 3 of them to focus on and then move on, right? So if you're entering a chamber and you focus on the important things too, like describe a few things about the important things and then move on. So like a vast chamber filled with howling wind and the strange scent of persimmon. Yes, in the center of this chamber, you see a massive iron pot, its edges gilded with scales, draconic scales, right? Frothing with a dark liquid, steam rising off the surface like mist off of a foggy river. You know, throw in a metaphor or two, add a little dash of poetry, engage a few of the senses, and then don't feel like you have to over-explain what's happening, right? But also like if players seem confused about like the physical location that they're in, obviously you want to flesh it out a little bit more. But I do have a TikTok about it, so I would just like down that playlist, scroll through. I have just so many pieces of advice just about descriptions as well. If we're talking about just writing, I'm gonna be really quick because I want to move on to the other questions as well. Think about scope, scale. So like when you're describing something, I think something that people especially I think like newer writers like might not notice, or this is something you can instinctively grasp. I think a lot of writers intuitively understand this. But I like my brain opened when I actually read a writing book that like said this, like literally. It was like think about descriptions cinematically. So like when you're describing, let's say, a kingdom, like what does it look like from a bird's eye view up top, right? Sprawling emerald forests, bristling teeths of pine, right? We're thinking like this is high level, and then you zoom in, like move the camera in your head, but you don't necessarily have to say the camera pans, right? You could just say, you know, we open on a sea of green, bristling teeths of pine. Upon a branch, a bright blue bird warbles a melodic song. What I've already done with that description is we've zoomed in on a branch. So we've moved in from the forest to a branch. And then I could say, its beady, glossy eye reflects a party of adventurers trekking through the deep snow underfoot. So now I've already controlled the camera. We've panned onto the reflection of the bird's eye. That's super deep. We're microscopic now. And then we pan down, right, to the people moving in the snow below. So a lot of it is just about training your brain to think visually and think cinematically, right? Direct the movie of your campaign in your head. What helps some people is to say the camera pans, right? I try my best. I think I think it's lovely, right? But me personally, this is just a stylistic choice. I try my best to cut that out of when I'm GMing because it feels a little bit like filler. Instead of saying like the camera pans down from the bird, I'll just say we see a group of adventurers trekking through the earth. And now, focusing on the adventurers, I could say like we focus on or we pan down to, but I usually don't say the camera because then it gets a little too, for me, personal taste, it gets a little too detached. So I'll say we focus, we pan down, etc. Moving on. Do you have any tips for correctly culturing a nation within a campaign? So many, and I can't address them all during my final ta-da to all of you. I would look at I have a playlist on YouTube that is Professor Chang's Tabletop Workshop. It's basically my pop-up shop, but a bit more extended. And the first few videos actually go into non-colonial, anti-Orientalist world building. So it's under Professor Chang's. It's on our YouTube. Just scroll down, hit Professor Chang's. It's like the first video. And I have it's like a 3-part lecture series or something where I specifically talk about that and answer your question. But the greatest hits are like, be specific. You don't want to do like a quote unquote melting pot approach that that's a really easy way to orientalize or to fetishize, to be honest. Like when you're just like grabbing a bunch of cultural practices from a bunch of real world places and mashing them into one thing. That's how you get Oriental adventurers. Be specific. Don't be afraid. Like lean into your own lived experience. So like even if you're white, right? Like we're all unique people. So like lead into what your specific upbringing. Like, did you grow up rural, right? Like, did you grow up in the South, right? And like you have a lot of, in a swamp or like whatever, like, were your parents Polish immigrants or something, right? Like draw on that, right? Draw on your own lived experience and like question why you would want to draw on like another real world cultures necessarily. In terms of fantastical cultural world building, really think about your initial assumptions and initial instincts and question them. So like your initial instinct when you're like building like a random fantasy kingdom might be like, okay, I have to think about the gentry, I have to think about the peasants, and then I have to think about like the fantasy co-ops, right? Oh god, what are they called? My brain's just blanking. The constabulary, right? The constables. Do you? Because that's a really specific political system that is honestly like historically like a dot on just like the history of human experience and like different types of governmental systems. So like, I personally love kingdoms because I love kings. I like royalty, I just do, but my approach to royalty is very like Chinese, it's like not like European royalty. So I've chosen to depict kingdoms as an intentional decision. So just like whatever you do, make sure it's intentional and like question your base or immediate impulses and instincts. Like, oh, like obviously there has to be a city guard. Does there? Like, how does crime and punishment work in your world? Is there even crime? Because crime is a social construct, right? Like, how do we deal with justice? I think an RPG that goes into these questions is Coyote and Crow, which I had the honor of playing recently. It's basically, it's written by native folk, designed by native folk, but playable by anyone. And it basically imagines a world where colonization didn't happen. Because like an event occurred that made colonization impossible. So it's modern day, but it's like there's like different kinds of technologies based on like different native practices and like heritages, right? It's honestly really cool. And they, their approach to crime and punishment is like really different, from like the court system we have in the States now. Stuff like that. Moving on to, let's see, question from Draconics. Can gods steal, lose, or earn domains? Yes. I think yes to all three. I think it's more interesting. if the answer is yes, because that's always how I make decisions too. It's like, is it more interesting if yes? And if the answer is yes, then yes. Yes, I do think so. I think gods can steal, lose, and earn domains, but I also think that it's really hard to do these three things. I don't know, because I feel like the gods in the city of heaven back during the devouring, when they were like attacking and cannibalizing and eating each other, like even then, it's not like let's say a god of wind. If they like destroyed a god of the furnace, it's not like they became a god of wind and furnace. Like it would take a lot more than just killing another god to like take over their domain. And maybe I think for some gods you can't. I think for some gods, if you kill them, they're just straight up gone from the world, and like there's always going to be an empty space where they used to be. So like if like the god of luck is killed, then like all of that just gets thrown into whack, and that's part of the consequence you have to deal with for getting rid of them. I feel like that's also more interesting than just like there's always balance. You know what I mean? If like one god eats or kills another and they get their powers. So I think it's difficult. I think the answer is yes, but it's difficult and it's not all the time. Moving on to your_feller_. What if the players playing my world don't take it seriously and don't really role play? How do I work with that possibility? I think it just depends on establishing what all of you want to get out of the game or the campaign from the beginning. Because here's an anecdote from when I was a baby GM and when I first started GMing. My very first campaign that I ever ran was for my high school friends. This was like right when we were graduating high school. And I was like, I want to do like an intense dark fantasy horror survival campaign. Like I was like, you know what? I've always been kind of messed up. Like I was like, I'm gonna cope with a lot of these like messed up monsters, these like messed up encounters. And then my players showed up. We didn't have a session 0 because I didn't know what a session 0 was. straight up, I didn't know what safety tools were. Like, I had no idea. I was just kind of like doing what the DMG was telling me to do, you know, because this was obviously, it was like D&D 5e was my entry point into TTRPGs. I hardly ever GM D&D anymore. And my players showed up to the table, and I was like, okay, this is the, like, they're gonna go into this, like, a horrific world. And my players showed up being like, okay, so I'm playing a ranger whose name is Yam, and their, like, panther partner is called Taro. You know, like the little fruit vegetable. And I was like, and they showed up for the memes, and I was like, here's this night hack who's doing terrible things because, like, you know, no safety tools. I had no idea what I was doing. Obviously, I've learned a lot since then, and so in that situation that I'm bringing up, neither of us was in the wrong, right? I was totally in the right. Like, I had every right to want to run a dark horror, serious fantasy campaign. They had every right to show up and just want a meme. What went wrong there is that we didn't talk about it, and we were not on the same page, and we kept playing, and it ended up being fine, honestly. Like, they would just be like, yeah, my ranger's just gonna, like, go into this tree and, like, you know, do these, like, they still did it. They, like, still interacted with the plot. And my players, you know, my friends, you know, they still cared about what I was doing, and they still cared about the world, right? But they were just a bit more lighthearted in their approach. I think in a situation where, like, your players just, like, straight up don't care, like, they're just, like, straight up not taking anything you're doing seriously, I don't think, try communicating twice. That would be my advice. Have one meeting, like, bring it up. It doesn't have to be intense. Like, bring it up in the group chat. Be like, hey, like, I would really love it if y'all took things a bit more seriously. Is that okay? Okay? And, like, don't do it in a judgmental way, right? Like, bring it up nicer than I phrase it, to be honest. Like, I'd bring it up and, like, ask, open a question, right? Be like, is that something you guys would be interested in? Like, is that something that you all would find fun? Because that's what I would find fun. And I think I'm, like, struggling a little bit with GMing because of XYZ, right? Like, frame it, use I statements, all of that. Like, communicate responsibly, right? Try to communicate twice, right? That first communication, the point of that is to see if they're even open. You know, if it was just a communication error, if they didn't even know, because there's a possibility, read in good faith, right? That they didn't know that you wanted them to take it seriously, right? Maybe they were just having fun showing up and just, like, sticking around playing with their friends, right? Like, because that's a super valid way to play. So if you bring it up the first time and they're like, oh yeah, oh totally, like, I'm sorry, like, I didn't realize, give me a chance, right? And if that ends up happening and they're still not taking it seriously, right? Or, like, there's like other things that are not working, I'd communicate again, right? I would always try to communicate twice. If after the second time and you really gave your best effort to, like, really fix this, amend this, and be on the same page, and it's still not working, then honestly, my advice is to either, like, live with it, to be honest, and, like, readjust your own expectations, because you're not going to get that out of this table, and or find another table to play with, to be honest. And I know that's, like, not necessarily what people want to hear, but you can't change a tiger's stripes, right? You can't force someone to have fun doing something they're not going to have fun doing, right? That's just going to be a lot of stress for everyone involved. There's also, you know, the possibility that the first time you try to communicate, they straight up are like, I don't want to do that. Great. And you, like, can just jump to step number 3 immediately. You know what I mean? So that would be my advice. Because you can't, and it's not a reflection on your skill or your worth as a GM, if, you know, if they don't want to tell the same kind of tone that you're telling. It's not. Like, it's just about different things that you want, right? So moving on, your feller also says, how do you balance your NPCs or characters? Sorry for all the questions. It's not that I asked for it, and I'm trying to knock them all out. Yeah. See, my producer's also flagging that we've done, like, an hour or so of Q&A. I'm so sorry, Sienna. We gotta wrap this up. I'm getting like the 5-minute thing, you know, at the back of the theater, because we gotta leave soon. Yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna do, like, two more questions. I'm gonna read and see if there's any questions that I, like, haven't, like, are completely different and I haven't addressed, and then I'm gonna wrap up. I promise. So, let's see. I'm gonna do, like, rapid fire. Balance your NPCs or characters. I just do. Depending on how important an NPC is, I give them more spotlight, right? If they're more side characters, then I might just, like, panda them once or twice, right? And it's also, it depends on the length of the campaign. If it's a one shot, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't do, like, 12 NPCs for a one shot. If it's a mini campaign, do a handful. If it's a long-term campaign, introduce NPCs consistently. Don't just, like, throw a bunch of them at once unless it's part of the premise. Moving on. Cartoon addict to games. Vocabulary is so insanely awesome. Thank you. Improves tips for improving vocab. Read more. Describing a villain or NPC the same way. Sorry, moving on. Seeing if there's any more questions. I don't think so. Oh, from Bonesy_0. How do you feel about people taking inspiration about your worlds? Go for it. Yeah. Like, especially for a home game, like I can't control what you do at your tables. Like if you're really inspired by something I've done and you want to like do it to your friends, like go for it. Yeah, sure. Like I share clips of like the on TikTok of like big moves I pull as a GM because I want people to watch a show. Honestly, I want more people to watch a show. And also like for inspiration for other people to show you what you could do as a GM, right? Like you don't have to just GM it the way that the books tell you to. You can put your own spin on it, your own flair, right? Like you don't just have to do what you see Matt doing or Brennan or even Abria, right? Like or Jasmine. You can do or even me, right? I want you to be inspired to do your own thing, right? Because I'm doing my own thing, and if that's like the best inspiration you could take from me is to see like, oh my god, Connie's doing their own thing. So I should do my own thing. Like, what makes me special? What can I bring to the table that no one else can? And everyone can bring something to the table that no one else can because no one is the same. And I think that's what's beautiful about GMing. If we're talking commercially, like if you're gonna do an AP or something like that, just like send me an email or something, like because then we're getting into IP stuff. But yeah, like if for a home game for sure, and stay tuned for a. This is something I'm gonna be working on next year. Stay tuned for news about a setting book, a Transplanar setting book, maybe based off of the Second Strangers setting and Dake. Translator setting book. I'm just gonna drop that in there. If that's interesting to you, the setting book isn't just gonna be interesting to fans of the Second Stranger. It'll be interesting for fans of non-colonial, anti-Orientalist world building, for people who like the kind of encounter design I do, right, and like the kinds of things I make and want to see an example like of it written in text that you can flip through of like something I've made and like how I approach world building. So that might be coming out in the next year or two, is my conservative estimate, but I'm going to be working on that next year. Very excited to share that. So if you want to stay tuned for more news about that, follow Transplanar on Twitter. Honestly, that's where we mostly post our updates. I refuse to call it by its new name. I refuse. Follow us on Twitter at TransplanerRPG. Setting guide. Yeah, it's going to be dope. Let's see. This isn't a question, but the cartoon addict says, taking inspiration from the garden burning as you've done to set up the downfall of an NPC, which leads to big badness. Yes, stuff like that. Please do go for it. Like take inspiration. Like I think that's awesome. Put it into your own campaign. Do your own thing with it. Yes. And I'm just gonna like very quickly go through TikTok and see if there's any like questions on TikTok. So, someone whose handle is gay 3 question marks, hopefully 2 question marks, says, when playing a more free-flowing game, how do you keep the plot in mind? For something that's a little more sandbox and less on rails, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be on rails, first of all, if that's what everyone's signing up for. Because I'm character driven, I always come up with the major antagonists' goals and their strategies, right? So it's like, that's how you can always keep things going, even if it's freeform, even if it's super exploration or roleplay based, right? So, like if the PCs aren't interfacing with what the villain's doing, that kind of doesn't matter. You can still advance their goals, right? If their goal is, for example, to take over a city, right? Like, and they're a crime lord or something, right? And the PCs are just like in one corner of the city and they're just like talking to the bakers in the bakery and they haven't like even like touched on anything. First of all, what you can do is you can drop the plot in front of them. You can always move set pieces around, just drop it in front of them, right? If you had a big set piece encounter planned for a dance club and they've been at the bakery for like two sessions, have the dance club come knocking, right? Have like people who they were going to meet at the dance club show up at the bakery, because guess what? The bakery's paying for protection and these people are showing up to collect their dues. Boom, hit them with a plot in the face, right? That's one thing you could do. The other thing is you should do this in addition to what I just said. It's just advance the plot, right? So like, what are the villain's goals? What are their strategies for achieving that? And what are the steps they will take to achieve those goals, right? This has been mechanically formalized in certain systems like Blaze in the Dark, Monster Care Squad, as clocks. So you basically draw like a circle and you make wedges, like the wedges on a clock, and you like fill one in every time you advance an antagonist's goal. So no matter the system you're doing, you could even just draw a clock and share it with your players. And when they're in the middle of doing something, you can just like check a wedge off, right? And that'll be like above the table. There'll be like what was that? You know, they'll be like, what was that? And they'll know that things are advancing even if they don't see them. If you want to go the extra mile to make it really punch, foreshadow it. That way it doesn't feel like they have no agency in what's happening, right? So if you know that this like big bad is going to take over this nightclub or whatever, like you can be like, and you hear something on the radio talking about like there's been like scuffles happening at the nightclub, right? And then check that clock, have them go, huh? And then next session, reveal that like the club's under new management. You know what I mean? Like, and this will make the world feel alive around the PCs, and like they're not, you know, like that there are things happening around them. They can choose to engage with it if it's more sandboxy. That would be my advice. Moving on, so many questions on TikTok. I'm sorry. I think I need to. I think I need to stop. I'm so sorry. But I think what this means is if you have any other questions, please hold on to them. Hold on to them for the next time I go live about Professor Chang's pop-up shop, or ask them in like the comments of my TikToks. I might make a TikTok about it, right? About your question, about the ones that the people want to know about the most. So thank you everyone so much for tuning in. This has gone like over 2 hours in. This has been such a lovely time. Thank you so much for watching wherever you are, whether you are on TikTok, whether you are on Twitch, whether you're on YouTube. As a reminder, we are going to be streaming Arc 2 Episode 1 of the Chaos Protocol next week, Saturday, January 6th at 8 p.m. US Eastern Time, wherever you're watching it. So it's either going to be on TikTok or Twitch or YouTube. Please tell your friends about it. Start watching the Chaos Protocol from the beginning, or if you want a sample platter of what our show's like, watch/listen to Godkiller First Blood on podcast. It's a 16-episode prestige mini-series. Some of the world building of Godkiller is similar to the world building in Arc 2 of the Chaos Protocol. It's like an hour per episode. It's like 16 hours of your time. Go through it, and it's a really great introduction to just the world of the transplanar multiverse of storytelling. And the Chaos Protocol, we just wrapped Arc 1, so now is honestly an excellent time to start binging Chaos in the week we have before Arc 2. We also, if it's 32 podcast episodes /16 streams feels like too much for you to listen to, we have a recap document. So you just read the recap of what happened in Arc 1, and then bam, show up for Arc 2, ready to go. So you can access all of these links on our website, transplanarrpg.com. You can also stay tuned to our latest updates, Transplanar RPG on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch, on TikTok. It'll be through my personal account. So by Connie Chang, if you're here on TikTok, throw me a like, throw me a follow. I upload like several times a week clips from the Chaos Protocol if you want to see what I'm talking about, as well as GM advice and some like TTRPG and D&D memes and whatnot. So yeah, we also, last plug, I promise, we have a Patreon. So if you want to support the show, this is what keeps the lights on. This is what helps us be able to do the things that we do. As low as $3 a month, you can just like, that's like less than a coffee these days, just like a coffee a month, right? Toss us some money. And this really helps us continue to do our thing. Patreon.com/transplanarrpg. You can also join as a free member or a free 7-day trial to like try out the perks first if you're not too sure about it. But it really does help, and you get some really dope perks, like an entire other after show that's just for patrons, as well as depending on the tier, you could even have your own OC guest, like not guest, but a cameo in our main campaign. Yeah, Patreon, Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. That's me. I've been your game master and creative producer, Connie Chang. My pronouns are they, he, and she. You can follow me all across the internet at by Connie Chang, namely TikTok and Twitter. And with that out of the way, I will see you on next Saturday. Thank you again so much for showing up to the stream. And as always, Spijo, and a Happy New Year.